that if anybody gets close to our idol, we have this protective layer. Sometimes it's anger. Sometimes it's deflection, trying to change the topic so we don't have to deal with it. Hey, Grace Fellowship Church, Pastor Jason here, coming to you live from our Independence campus. Actually at Independence this morning on a cold, rainy morning. It's Wednesday. This is the word. That means it's time for Wednesday Word. Let's get right to it. Hey, I've been reading along with the rest of the church here in Pastor Brad's book, Gospel Treason. Hope you get a copy of it and are following along as well. Just some really, really good material in here in order to think through and to make part of your own life as you examine those idols of your heart and the ways that they lead us astray. As I was reading this morning in my own personal time in Matthew chapter 16, I saw this on full display. It jumped out at me like it had never jumped out at me before. And I think there's something for our own hearts that we can learn from the example of the disciples who were having to deal with the own idols that they carried around in their heart. Jesus had just had an encounter with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the religious leaders were asking for signs. And Jesus tells them that, basically the sign is standing right in front of them, and if they can't see it, no other sign that Jesus does is going to get their attention. And then he leaves, and he spends some time with his disciples. It says in verse 5, when the disciples reached the other side, they had forgotten to bring any bread. And Jesus said to them, "Watch and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees." So Jesus takes this opportunity in order to teach them a lesson about the encounter that they just had with the Pharisees and the Sadducees. In verse 7 it says, "And they began discussing it amongst themselves, saying, 'We brought no bread.'" So right away, their mind goes to something very tangible. In fact, in their culture, this idea of leaven was really important because there were certain days they weren't allowed to eat leavened bread, and then other days when they were allowed to eat leavened bread. And their mind goes right to all of those rules. But Jesus, aware of this, says, "O you of little faith, why are you discussing among yourselves the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive? Do you not yet remember the 5 loaves and the 5,000 and how many baskets you gathered, or the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many baskets you gathered? How is it that you fail to understand that I did not speak about bread? Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees." Then they understood that he did not tell them to beware of the leaven of bread, but of the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They had a preconceived notion. They were bringing into this their own idols. They were committed as a people to following all the rules and getting it all right, to being perfect, because after all, God was perfect and called them to the same thing. But they didn't realize that the only way to achieve that was through God's mercy. It wasn't through their own effort. And here Jesus is having this very simple, clear communication with them, and they miss it because they bring in with them these own idols that they carry along. And not only do they bring it in with them, but there's this a shield that they've created around those idols in order to protect them. Everything that they experience gets interpreted through those idols. And Jesus has to push back against them. I think, brothers and sisters, I think you and I are very much the same way. That if anybody gets close to our idol, we have this protective layer. Sometimes it's anger. Sometimes it's deflection, trying to change the topic so we don't have to deal with it. Today, I just want you to internalize the message of Jesus. To allow him to push through those barriers and to get to those idols that you've been protecting for so long, and allow him to speak truth into it. He wanted the best for his disciples. That was clear in his word. And he wants the best for you today. If you would allow him to get close enough in order to make a difference. He gives us a promise. He says, actually, it's a prophecy about him, but that he would take our heart of stone and turn it into a heart of flesh. That we don't have to have a protective layer in order to keep him out. But instead, he would come and he would help us to feel again, to know the things of him and his Father again, to experience his Spirit in a new and a fresh way. That's my invitation to you today. God bless you guys. Have a wonderful week. We'll see you again next week on Wednesday